Let's say you're the president of France and it's the eve of the 2020 campaign over the United States. You might be wondering whether trade tensions are here to stay and whether we've truly entered the age of the illiberal strongman. Well, meet Emmanuel Macron. He's in Shanghai as part of what he's billed as an annual pilgrimage to China. France's president sees opportunity with plenty of agriculture products to export to the nation that has, well, 1 in 5 humans to feed. He's got French culture to export as well with the inauguration of a new branch of the Pompidou Center Museum. And he also sees a Chinese president who's just consolidated his grip on the Communist Party yet more, a Xi Jinping who's a tough negotiator when it comes to issues like intellectual property rights, digital dominance, and who doesn't suffer fools gladly when it comes to territorial disputes in the South China Sea, or pesky questions from journalists on Hong Kong or Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province. We'll ask about Macron's approach, bringing an EU commissioner on this trip, as well as German cabinet members with him, and positioning himself as the emissary of an EU that's got clout of its own when it's united. Is this the way to handle China? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Emmanuel Macron's 3-day trip, and joining us, French Senator Richard Yung, who hails from Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche party.
Correct.
Thanks for being with us.
Pleasure.
I want to welcome as well Chunyan Li, founder of Theta Consulting and the author of Succeeding in the Chinese Market.
Yeah, right.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome back as well to Alice Ekman, Senior Analyst at the European Union for Institute Security Studies, and which the acronym is?
EUISS.
EUISS, and the author of China in the World. André Lezecug-Pretry, founder of A Capital, is with us as well. How are you, sir?
Good evening.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Flex your muscles, but without offending one's host. That's how Le Monde's article begins. At the midway point of Emmanuel Macron's 3-day state visit, the French president addressing the big China International Import Expo in Shanghai.
La Chine est un pays d'inventeurs.
China is a country of inventors. In the past, it was gunpowder and the compass. Today, it's artificial intelligence and quantum computing. We also need a more open China and Chinese domestic market. All these businesses, French, German, European, are expecting a lot of promises from China that are being discussed here.
So the speech was a bit like that, right? It was a bit of, oh, China's great, you're a fantastic country. Please be a little bit more open with your market. How do you think, is that the right way to speak in front of a Chinese audience?
Yes, and I think there are also some evolutions regarding the market access to the Chinese market. For example, the Chinese president has promised to open more Chinese market in the coming years. And also, in last May, we had a new law launched in China for the foreign investment. And also, China would like to import more foreign products. That's why we have the second import fair at Shanghai. And I think there is one thing which is very important for the French companies and products is that today in China we have the middle class.
But is Emmanuel Macron using the right words there when he, when he talks about you invented gunpowder and the compass and this kind of thing? Is he using the right language in his speech?
You mean the more open, more open
and calling
market.
them to be, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think for me, I observe a good atmosphere of dialogue.
A good atmosphere.
Yeah.
All right, Alice Ekman.
Well, it's realpolitik. You have China-US tension waiting on all bilateral relations. In this framework, China has tried to seduce the EU and European countries by saying, well, look, we both disagree on Trump's administration decision on Iran nuclear deal, climate change, multilateralism, is disinvesting, etc. So let's try a rapprochement. But this rapprochement so far has not taken place for several reasons. There is still an issue on market access, and both the US and Europe generally agrees on the diagnosis that China has not opened up so far. On the contrary, and from an ethical point of view, this is my point of view, clearly, you have a reinforcement of the state, of the role of the state in the economy and the role of the party in the economy. Party cells have been more present in companies, both public and private. And we are still now in a planned economy, and some sectors...
Why this doubling down? Why the fact that we saw recently a meeting of the top brass of the Communist Party, where again Xi Jinping's power was further consolidated. Why this doubling down, and on all aspects of life, as you say, on the economy?
Well, we have to understand that under Xi Jinping, China is taking a new path that is an adjustment slightly different from Hu Jintao's era. Most party cadres say under Xi Jinping that China should follow the path of socialism. You know, capitalism that was basically touched upon during the Deng Xiaoping era basically was just a parenthesis, because China came out of poverty and it was basically needed to open up at this point in time just to find a solution to come out of this poverty. But still, we are still very much in a socialist system. At least that's what Xi Jinping believes. And he believes in the ultimate ideal of communism. And I'm saying this with quite confidence, because you have internal discourse and you have external discourse. So this external discourse is about opening up the Chinese market. But in concrete terms, it's harder for foreign companies to develop their activities on the Chinese market. So this is quite clear, even Chamber of Commerce, from EU side, from German side, from American side. You have a consensus. Of course, it depends on the industry. Cosmetic is not considered strategic, so L'Oreal is doing great in China, but other companies in sectors considered as strategic, such as energy sector, telecommunication sectors, they are very much controlled, very, very controlled.
But there are many French companies and German companies or foreign companies working very well in China, like Schneider Electric, like all the luxury brands in China, like Suez Environnement, etc. So we cannot say that Chinese market is closed.
So two narratives is what Alice Ekman. It's two narratives is what you're saying, that there's what's for domestic consumption. But let's listen to what was for international consumption earlier.
It's about communication.
Right. China's president offering the narrative of a nation that's open for business.
China will give greater importance to imports. We will continue to lower tariffs and institutional transaction costs. China will continue to optimize its opening up structure. China's opening up is all-dimensional and all-sectoral. A new structure of all-out opening is quick in the making.
So, André Lozicouk-Pietri, if you're an investor, you hear those words. Is that enough to reassure you?
No, not at all. I think there's a great disconnect right now between politics and the business, and I would say the real world. I think the good news is that finally Emmanuel Macron has taken what basically business is saying since 10 years, which is the Chinese market is not open, is actually less and less open. And just give some facts, because it's important just not to have opinions but facts. Financial services, foreigners had 2% of market share in 2001 when China joined the WTO. Today it's 1.3%. And at the same time, of course, the market grew. So it was still good business for many people, but the market closed down. So indeed, like Alice said earlier, the market in strategic sectors is actually closing down. There's this incredible paper which is called China 2025, which probably the civil servant that disclosed that in China probably inadvertently must have been sacked by now, because it was very un-Chinese, because for the first time a couple of years ago, it was clearly said, these are the market shares of the foreigners today. These are the ones we want to have them in 2025, and on average it was dividing by 5. So this discourse about opening up, I think it's very important that Europe, at the moment where China really needs friends in a very complicated relationship with the US, I mean, 35 billion tariffs have been paid by Chinese exporters to the US since the beginning of the sanction. It's massive. It's hitting the economy.
But you're making it sound as though the US is right to put the pressure on China.
Look, I mean, in 2001, when WTO accession was granted, there were clear promises about opening up the markets. It's a clear fact that these opening up have not happened in the telco sector, in the e-commerce sector, in the mobility sector. You see increasingly a number of companies retreating from China. Think about Auchan, think about Carrefour, think about PSA for the French. It's what a symbol.
The car maker.
Remember, I mean, for those who are over 40 years old, they might remember this famous advertising for French AX, which was
Citroën cars,
the very first ones who believed in the Chinese market. That was in the late 80s and 90s. The company retreated massively its production. So I think it's important now not to see promises anymore, but deeds. And maybe on your first question about the discourse, I think respect is a universal value, and the French president is doing it very well.
Can you just answer
But
very quickly?
let me just finish on that.
Excuse me.
But I think it's very important now to see facts, and especially the Europeans. Next year, when there will be the big, they should not be driven by the intention of having a deal at all costs, but they need to have a deal which is good for their own companies, for China. And for the moment, we don't see that happening.
I'll be very short. Let's look at the facts you mentioned about that. Today, all the international brands are presenting China. Regarding the telecommunication industry and the energy industry, there is EDF presenting China, Alcatel-Lucent presenting China. Of course, we need to respect some rules like the joint venture, etc. But that depends on the industry. And secondly, about the financial market, China has promised to open more the financial market in the coming years. So that depends on the industry.
Has promised, but it hasn't happened yet.
Because this takes time.
Take the example of the joint ventures. I think this is a very good example. The joint ventures was justified at the time where China was a so-called developing market. But today, this rule should be completely scrapped.
It's changing. The first Tesla factory in Shanghai is the first one in the automotive industry, which is a Wolfo, wholly owned, the foreign company. Yeah, go. Sorry.
I was going to say, Senator, China still has a status in the WTO where it's treated like an emerging economy. Is that right?
I'm not quite sure. I think they can ask to be treated so, but I think that for the time they haven't asked. Probably it's a problem of prestige and how they see it. So I think for the time this is not an issue. The figures are clear. We sell for 20 billion a year to China. They sell for 50 billion a year to us. So we have a disbalance of 30 billion per year for the trade balance. So it's clear that there's something wrong.
And when you have Emmanuel Macron, who has said, I want to go every year to China, is he just chasing after Germany, which already does that?
He should, because our main problem, but it's not only with China, our big companies are usually pretty good, and they are there. The CAC 40, as we say.
The big corporations.
But as soon as you go down, then we're out. And the Germans are there.
The small, medium enterprises, they do better with them.
Small and medium size, they have very good enterprises, very competitive. They come to China, they produce there, and we just, we look at things. So we have a real problem there. It's not a problem of China, but it is also true that China doesn't open its market. Mind you, it's the same with the US. When we discuss trade matters with the US, we say to the US, please open up your market. Please accept that European firms deal.
So when Emmanuel Macron brings with him German cabinet members, when he brings with him Phil Hogan, who's the outgoing agriculture commissioner, and who's going to be a commissioner in the trade on trade, Alice Ekman, is that the right way to go about it?
It is. This action is responding to Chinese initiative to interact with Europe at various levels: bilateral level, sub-regional level, and Brussels level.
Can it work?
China in 2012 created a format called 16+1, now 70+1, with Central and Eastern European countries. So China had a format of interaction with part of Europe, some being EU member states, some not being EU member states. China also have bilateral dialogues with most EU member states, and China also interact at EU level. So that's
So Macron's trying to put a bloc together, right? And you heard André Lozekug-Pietri talking about how you need to be united if you're going to try to bargain hard with the Chinese. And then we saw those images earlier of some in the French delegation quoted as being ruffled by the prominent billing that was offered in Shanghai today to Italy's foreign minister, Luigi Di Maio, who as co-leader of the previous coalition government with the far right had helped open the door for China's Belt and Road Initiative, leaving many Europeans uneasy. Alice Ekman, as you know, Europe is trying to act like a united bloc here. Does that undermine Europe if Di Maio is coming there as basically the poster child of Belt and Road?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Italy signed a MOU on the Belt and Road, which was a framework agreement, which is a general agreement. It was not really precise, the agreement. In general term, you have a convergence of position on Belt and Road at EU level. Especially EU has promoted its own connectivity strategy. So it issued its own plan, infrastructure plan, and it's recently signed what we said, a connectivity agreement with Japan. So you have a dynamic here. I mean, at EU level, in Brussels level,
is Luigi Di Maio a problem?
I don't think so, no. Because first of all, politics is moving in Italy. And second, you have a convergence of views really in Brussels. Whatever you consider, you had the strategic outlook on China. So basically, your first EU strategy that was released less than 1 year ago by Brussels. And in general term, you had some decisions.
We also saw the new Greek prime minister who's there in Greece, which does, you know...
Well, it's not bad. What Macron is trying to do is to build a European approach, because, as you said, the problem is that the foreign policy and the foreign trade policy of Europe is not so strong compared to the US, and this is where we are weak. And this is where the Chinese look at us and think, well, these people, they are not so strong. Mr. Trump, he is a real tough man. So Macron is trying, I don't know if he will succeed, I hope he does, to build a common approach with Italy. You mentioned Greece.
This bringing of foreign members into his delegation, is this a gimmick, a one-off, or is this...
No, I think symbols matter. And remember, in spring this year, when Macron welcomed Xi Jinping, he invited a bit at the last minute Angela Merkel and the president of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. That was really a hit. And what I heard from the Chinese delegation is they tried very hard, even with a little bit of threatening of cancelling the visit, because they didn't want that actually to happen. And I think that was high. Here, Phil Hogan, of course, he's a future trade commissioner, but he's not that powerful in the commission. And Anja Karliczek, I have a lot of respect for her, but she's a relative junior minister in the coalition in charge of education and research. It does not bear the same weight, but he's trying hard. The problem is that Macron can only do what he can. He's playing with symbols. Now, what we need to see is a united Europe on deeds, which is there united, he's talking about artificial intelligence. There's no European common approach on artificial intelligence. Okay. There is no common approach on one belt, one road. This needs to happen between the summits and before the big summit. The Chinese will take us seriously.
We're going to be right back. We're taking a quick break. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at Emmanuel Macron's trip to China in the company of French Senator Richard Yung, who hails from Macron's La République En Marche party. Welcome back as well to Chunyan Li, founder of Feda Consulting, author of Succeeding in the Chinese Market. Alice Ekman, senior advisor at the European Institute for Security Studies, EUISS, there you go, and author of China in the World, and André Lozekrug-Petri, founder of A Capital. Before the break, we were talking about this new Macron approach of bringing in, and you heard André saying, well, Chinese prefer to deal one-on-one with countries, not with...
I think France has several cards to play. The first one is the European card. It's true that in terms of size, I mean, France, it's more interesting for France to play the European card, to work with Germany or other European countries, to negotiate on the collaboration conditions. And especially, Europe is not unified already. You have sometimes difficulty in getting agreement inside Europe already. So, and what's more, Europe is more perceived as a geographical concept in China. for the Chinese, what counts more is the individual country. So there are some different approaches, between both countries. That's the first point. Second point, I think France has a very good card. It's an economic card. France has expertise in many domains, especially today. Chinese market is evolving, which creates new opportunities for French companies, like environment, like the agri-food sector, like climate, like the biotechnology, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And last card is a cultural card.
All right, let's talk about the cultural card. Once again, the French playing the soft power meets the tourism industry card, you might call it. Emmanuel Macron inaugurating the latest branch of the Pompidou Center Museum in Shanghai. Our correspondent Charles Pellegrin had a visit.
This brand new building on the banks of the Huangpu River and the 25,000 square meters inside are Shanghai's Pompidou Center. Putting the finishing touches is all that is left to do before opening day. About 100 works from the Parisian Museum are on show here in 3 different galleries. Paintings by Picasso and Miro, but also by contemporary artists. A few hours before its inauguration, its chief curator Marcella Lista couldn't contain her excitement.
I find opening a museum in a new location quite exciting, moving collections, presenting them in a different light, in a different context. It means we can also freshen them up, look at them differently.
Over the course of the next 5 years, the Parisian institution will share its expertise and its name with its Chinese partner, the West Bund Museum. Shanghai authorities are banking on this prestige to bring people to an area that doesn't get many visitors.
I don't know the details yet because it's not open, but it's definitely going to attract a lot of people.
In our daily life, there are few occasions to look at art, so this museum will give us this opportunity. It's very exciting.
In order to reach its Chinese audience, concessions had to be made, and while the management refuses to describe it as censorship, authorities had to approve all the works.
I didn't really feel censored. Some works were put in question, others were replaced. But in the end, we got the result that we wanted. If it seemed like an exhibit lost its essence, I wouldn't present it.
The partnership will also mean extra revenue for the Pompidou Center, a boon for any cultural institution. But at the request of the Chinese side, that exact amount hasn't been disclosed.
So, yeah, it's good business for both sides. Now, Senator, I wasn't expecting the Pompidou Center to open with an exhibit devoted to Ai Weiwei, the Chinese dissident. But what's your reaction when you hear the boss there saying, well, some works were accepted, others were not? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a good thing that we can export culture, and not only with this Centre Pompidou in Shanghai, but you know all the other examples in the Arabian Gulf, and all. This is a good way of proceeding. But let me say that the real thing at Trust is what we want to sell to China is our beef, our pork, our technology, because there is always this image of France. France is the country of good life, of good food, wine. But we have other items.
All right, let's talk about that. On the plane over from Paris, the French president brought some samples. Li Xiaoyong will be pleased to know that Emmanuel Macron offered a taste of French beef, charolaise, for those who know it.
Good.
And French wine, this hot on the heels of the deal struck to protect geographical areas on the labels for brands such as champagne wine and Roquefort cheese. Xi Jinping, a good host, says Macron, and sampling all 3 of the wines that were on offer.
I believe he liked the 3 wines. I sensed that he discovered Languedoc wine, a wine he didn't know and he appreciated. He knew about Burgundy wines, and he tasted a classic vintage Bordeaux.
First of all, what do you think of the Languedoc wine? I don't know what he sampled.
Well, I'm very disappointed that there was no Corsican wine on display, because Corsica is also part of France. But Look,
but here we are happily talking about wine, but whether or not the works were censored at the Pompidou Museum, does that matter?
You know, when I hear the new president-elect, and I totally concur with her, Ursula von der Leyen, she wants to make out of the European Commission a geopolitical commission. Right. And this is what is at stake. Everything in the world in which we are is strategic again. And the fact that today we see that, as you mentioned, brands are much more welcomed in the country, that you have this more protection on intellectual property, I don't think it's a gesture toward the European. Is just following the path that now internal consumption is absolutely critical for the Chinese. So yes, we are benefiting from it. But as soon as it becomes strategic, high-tech, energy, transportation.
But does that mesh, developing this consumer culture, does that mesh with what Alice Ekman was describing in part one of our discussion, which is a central government that wants to have a more top-down approach and more control more everything, including what works of art get to hang at the Pompidou Center.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I'm a little bit concerned, to be frank with that.
Alice Ekman.
I think we have to put things back into context a bit. At the 19th Party Congress in autumn 2017, Xi Jinping said very clearly, black and white on paper in his report, that artists and intellectuals should extol the party. So since then, censorship has been stronger. So I do not judge, cooperation in culture. I'm just saying, I can say for sure, as an analyst looking at China, that the work of the Pompidou Center in Shanghai will be a struggle. In a sense
but if we're developing, further than that, if you're developing a consumer market in the terms that André is talking about, at what point does the central authority lose its grasp on the...
The general question is that, is Europe still trying to change China in one way or another, to channel China toward the direction that it hopes is beneficial towards opening up in art, in economy, in agriculture, everything? Is Europe doing this? Because US consider now, in the Trump administration, that there is no way. Basically, at least that we should not, the US consider that we should not wait for central government to evolve, because they are not only considering that China should stop receiving Western hostile interferences, so basically should stop being influenced by the West, and you have within the top leadership in China now a quite strong resentment against the West, considering that for too long politicians, economists, companies have been trying to change China, being basically to channel China toward the direction of liberalization or toward changing the political system and the economic system. So not only, according to the Communist Party of China, China should stop receiving these influences, should control them, but now should counterattack to promote a China model abroad. So basically to promote abroad a model of governance, of art, of media, including journalism forum, to teach emerging countries and developing countries how to develop a journalism that is positive. So basically you have a competition here between political system at all levels. And I'm pretty confident to say it because Chinese officials say that very straightforwardly. They don't talk about models, they talk about experience. So other countries, in particular developing countries, should learn from China's experience. So basically what's happening on China's territory should be a model for other countries. This, I'm summing up the competition now. So you clearly have a competition between political system that should not be underestimated, because it has been reinforced with, within international organizations, but also with programs such as training program for officials, training program for journalists, but also through Belt and Road forums, through party-to-party ties. So basically China in 2017 invited for the next 5 years 15,000 representatives of foreign political parties, including from Serbia, including from Ethiopia, including from Ecuador, to learn about the Chinese system and to learn about how China managed a different type of things from media. So you have now a competition.
Too many concerns in
it's not a concern,
the political system.
Analysis.
I mean, as we see, the political system are so different between China and the West. It's almost, at this time, being impossible, in my eyes, to export the political system of China to the Western world. Second point is that, as I've been working with some French communists, and some French communists told me, actually, we have learned from Chinese market, because the market is very dynamic, it's evolving fast. So yes, we can learn from Chinese market. And the software of China is still not strong enough. Look at how many people speak Chinese in France? How many people really read Chinese books, really know Chinese literature? But when I was in China, when I was in the schools, when I was little, we already started to read some text from French literature, and the French literature is much appreciated by the Chinese people. So I mean, the software is not of China. It's not enough.
It's true that the Chinese people and the Chinese culture is much more curious about what happens elsewhere than we are. We are, of course, the best, and the others have to copy us. But I don't think that the Chinese government has in mind that we will copy the communist system of China. I don't think they are realistic people. They know what they want. I think what they want is to do business. I think that's what they want.
Yeah,
and also to, for instance, control the South China Sea, and they've chastised the French over sending a frigate through that area.
That we didn't really appreciate because the ship was in international waters.
I kind of disagree with this.
We let it know to the Chinese government.
André Lozier-Petri, there's going to be a press conference at the tail end of this trip. Surely journalists will be asking the question, what about Hong Kong? What about the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims? At this point in time, what are your thoughts on how this, again, the stories being told in one place and the stories being told in the other?
I think Emmanuel Macron has a habit of never wanting to be put under pressure, either by events or by outside circumstances. So I trust that, and on that one I have a slight disagreement with the senator. I don't think that the relationship, we too long thought that the relationship with China can be only business. And I will give just one very concrete example, technology. I mean, we are entering a world which will be driven by technology. All technology carry values with them. When you talk about face recognition, when you talk about artificial intelligence, when you talk about cybersecurity, you're carrying values. And so when you are trying to export these technologies, and think about the whole debate about 5G, obviously there are consequences which are not just pure political. So I think, again, in order to be strong as European, we have to be respectful, mindful of what is considered inside affairs of China. But on the other side, I think if the Europeans don't speak out about topics which are core to their system, their values, then the risk is that we will not be taken
Okay, so as we lay the groundwork for this EU-China summit early next year in Germany, what should be the position of the European Union when it comes to 5G technology?
Well, first of all, today we have a diversity of responses across the EU on 5G based on their own analysis, risk analysis, their own relation with existing Huawei technology or not, etc. So I don't believe there will be,
because the US clearly views it as a security menace.
But for sure now there is a strong strategic approach on what is called critical infrastructure. How to reinforce the security of networks, being technologies, telecommunication, energy networks, etc. At a time of, and I agree, everything is becoming geopolitical at a time of US-China competition. Clearly, we also may enter an area of decoupling. This word is very popular now in Washington. Basically, some technologies being not compatible anymore with other technologies. In part, US and Chinese technologies not being compatible anymore, but also Chinese technologies with some European technologies at a time where now Chinese key tech companies, especially the ones who have been blacklisted by the Trump administration, are investing to be less dependent on foreign technologies. So at this point
an unwinding of globalization as we know
At this point in time, we may enter bipolarization of globalization. We may be in the very first step. I know this sounds like big strategic analysis, but it's not surreal, it's not completely crazy, because clearly already Chinese companies and US companies are trying to readjust the supply chain and their R&D basically strategy to be more independent. And I think this is also the debate in Brussels, is how to be less dependent on foreign technologies, on foreign infrastructure, and this needs a strong investment in R&D, of course.
This is what we are doing for electrical batteries for cars. This is one of the items on which Europe is investing a lot. But it's true that we are not doing it for 5Gs and international artificial intelligence. But for batteries, yes, because we are dependent on China.
Right. A thorn in we're talking about everything is political, a thorn in Franco-Chinese relations, the criminal case that was approved here in Paris last month against Bank of China. It's one of the country's largest lenders, and it's accused of money laundering. French diplomats are quoted as saying they fear retribution against their own banks because, quote, the Chinese think that political authorities can undo a legal decision. Is that really the mindset that that Emmanuel Macron can snap his fingers and the case against a legal case that's been brought over money laundering can be undone? Is that how people really think?
I think, first of all, if we want to do business with China, it's true that we need to take into account also the political elements, cultural elements, economic elements. And in China, it's very important, to maintain very good relationship with the government, like in France, in certain.
But do they understand this concept in the West that justice is blind and that?
Of course,
independent.
Of course,
not blind,
of course.
Independent.
It was said very eloquently before that the Chinese were studying. The top brass in China knows perfectly that Emmanuel Macron has no power on the justice. But the card will be played to say, if you really want to protect the good relationships, then we expect a gesture from you. And here again, you come to this value topic. If the European back down, and say, yeah, we're trying to mitigate the case, the risk is that the door will be open for any kind of negotiation on which we will have the lower ground. So again, it's not to be aggressive, but Europe has to take a stance which goes with critical mass. And on some of these strategic topics, I think it's a huge, as a citizen now I express myself, the fact that a couple of European countries have not been able to align themselves on something so critical like 5G, which will be basically the blood of tomorrow's digital infrastructure. It's a huge failure of politicians. I think there is nobody else, it's not Tencent, no Google to blame, it's up to us to blame. And this is something I expect from Emmanuel Macron, from Merkel, to do not in the next year, but in the next weeks. And by the way, there was an announcement just a couple of hours ago from the Interior Minister of Germany, who for the first time expressed very strong concerns about Huawei, which is a first in Germany.
About Huawei?
Yeah, that's very new.
Yeah, I just want to mention one Chinese proverb, which I think is very interesting approach to deal with the differences between China and the West or Europe, is to find the common ground while keeping the differences. So we have many differences. The political differences, economic, cultural. But then, I think for me, I'm quite positive.
You know where this quote is coming from. You know that. You know where the quote is coming from.
Yeah.
From Zhou Enlai, so Mao.
No, it's not real from Zhou Enlai.
Well, actually,
used by him. Yeah,
it was used by him.
Used by him.
But
so
this is really in line with the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, and in line with Mao era foreign policy orientation.
It's consistent with traditional Chinese philosophy. Yeah.
Well, I would not date that to.
No, it's not invented by Zhou Enlai.
No, but clearly, we are in hard time at this point in time. It's tough competition between China and the US. It's very hard work.
But it's better
I'm not for wars or anything. I'm just saying the geostrategic context is very hard and very difficult and very
there's all
tense.
these hints right now that they might. There's a hint that they might put it back. That they might find some agreement between the U.S. and China.
Actually,
will these tensions go away even if there is a deal?
In my opinion, it will last for quite some time because tensions are multi-layered. Even if a trade deal is signed and we don't know when and how and to which level, you have very strong geostrategic tension over South China Sea, over the Taiwan Strait, over the Korean Peninsula, even over Hong Kong to some extent, even over Xinjiang to some extent. You also have divergences on technology, and this is central, as we mentioned, 5G, but not only, about surveillance camera, about smart city package. Now you have a full decoupling between US and Chinese technologies, emerging. And you also have, and as we mentioned now, you have institutional competition within the WTO, within the UN, and you have ideological competition, which is stronger than under Hu Jintao, because I say it again, but this is the fact, and this is what Xi Jinping is saying. He said in 2013, I believe that at some point, socialism will win over capitalism. We may not believe in his word, but that's what he clearly said and believes.
Yeah, I would like to highlight that Chinese proverb is used a lot by Chinese people. It's not really political. It's a very famous Chinese proverb. And for me, in my point of view, I would like to be optimist than being pessimist. All the differences you have mentioned, it's true, they exist. But if we don't, try to negotiate and try to find a solution, what would we have tomorrow?
Of course, and there will be more negotiation. We will be talking about it again on the show. Chun-Yen Li, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Andre Lizakuk-Petri, Alice Ekman, Senator Richard Jung. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. So just to have a look at some of the online reactions to all of this, there's been a lot of anticipation of this trip in the French media. Le Point, in this article, saying that the big thorn in Emmanuel Macron's foot has been the whole question of Hong Kong and how to manage this situation, or the Hong Kong situation, during his stay in China, when the authorities have clearly...
Listen to Andre how to not talk about
it? Right, exactly, at least publicly. And that is certainly being mentioned today on social media as various people comment or react to this. This is Bénédicte Généraux of Human Rights Watch. She is the director of Human Rights Watch France, and she is saying that while it is a good thing that the Élysée it says that human rights will be addressed without taboo during Emmanuel Macron's visit to China, it is necessary that the president raise these issues publicly. So I suppose that's the whole point. If it's done at a private tete-a-tete, it's one thing, but there's pressure from NGOs that this will be done publicly. She goes on, Bénédicte Généraux, to say in a second tweet, during his visit to China, Emmanuel Macron should publicly reaffirm the call of 23 countries, including France, for the end of the mass arbitrary detention of Uyghurs and other Muslims in Xinjiang and the access of the UN to the region. So certainly France, as the self-proclaimed country of human rights, is not being let off the hook too lightly by Human Rights Watch. Bernard Guetta, a well-known French journalist and specialist in international relations, and now an MEP for Macron's En Marche movement, he has been speaking out as well, and he thinks that France does have enough power, if you like, and rapport de force, that the rapport de force allows for France to bring up these issues publicly, and that it is a moral obligation to do so, human rights issues.
You agree, Senator?
Yes, I do.
So that is being stated by people within his own political family, sure. Bernard Guetta in En Marche. So certainly the pressure is there, but from the point of view of many editorials, when Bernard Guetta talks about the rapport de force allowing for issues to be brought up, that doesn't seem to be, strictly speaking, the point of view of Le Monde, who says it is an illusion for any European country at this stage to think that it can play equal partners with China. In other words, the European structure is necessary for this to happen, so France on its own wouldn't necessarily have the rapport de force. And that this is essentially, from the point of view of another editorial, this is La République de l'Iran, this is essentially just a business trip. More than anything else.
On a business trip.
Right. So there you go. And there's even harsher words on some of the louder talk shows, such as Les Grandes Gueules. And one participant of that said that France loves to give lessons, but when it comes to human rights, really we're talking here about tartufferie. Tartufferie. Why don't you explain that?
And there's the hashtag wine and cheese.
Right.
All right.
A tartufferie is a reference to the Molière character, who is, you could basically say he's a bit of a hypocrite or an imposter. Yeah. So it's definitely not a very flattering way to speak about le pays de droits de l'homme. But so there you go. It is generating quite a bit of a debate. Meanwhile, on social media, Emmanuel Macron has been live streaming the inauguration of the Centre Pompidou Westbund Museum in Shanghai. Various diplomats are saying that this is really a magnificent success, a magnifique succès, and the culture minister as well tweeting about all of the advantages of these cultural and economic exchanges. So from the cultural, economic point of view, great success. From the human rights point of view, perhaps a bit less.
All right, well, trip's not over yet.
That's true.
Many thanks, James.
Tomorrow? Still one day?
There'll be a press conference. We'll be covering it here on France 24. I want to thank James Creedon. I want to thank our panel, and thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.